G'day guys, welcome to the Elevate online experience. If you've been with us before, welcome back. And if you haven't and it's your first time joining us, it's so good to have you.
Well, hi, and thanks heaps for allowing me into your space to share some thoughts with you. Something that I discovered a little while ago, and I put together this message because it made me realize that I have a choice about every day and about who I am. Here's a question I want to give you right up front. What are you wearing? That might sound like a weird question, and right now you might be sitting in front of a screen or a TV or something, but I want to ask you a question. What are you wearing? I wonder if you've heard the term enclothed cognition. Enclothed cognition is a phenomena in which where people tend to adopt the traits and properties that associate with their clothes. So in other words, what you wear will determine your emotions. What you put on every day will determine and reflects the traits of how you feel. See, this morning, or whenever you get up, you make a decision. You make a decision about what am I going to wear. Now, if you work in a place which has a uniform, then that's usually predetermined. You've got something that you will be wearing today. But in some places where you choose what you wear, they've discovered that what you wear actually impacts the way you work. It impacts your moods and therefore impacts your attitudes and impacts your work. Interesting study would be to see how work and how people's work has changed since we've been working from home. Some people now work from home and they're probably still in their pajamas while they're working. Don't want to go there, but I wonder how that impacts the decision making. So I asked the question, what do you wear and what are you wearing? But I'm not talking about your clothes, I'm talking about the decision of your life, your emotions. There was a guy called Paul many years ago who wrote to a church in Colossia. And in Colossia, he was actually writing from a prison at the time. And he made this statement in Colossians 3:12 in the Bible, in the scriptures. It's one of the letters of Paul. And he made this comment. He said, since God chose you, he made a decision for you, since God chose you to be the holy people he loves, you must clothe yourself with tender-hearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. So I asked the question, what have you chosen or what have you put on today? What are you wearing? Or here's another question that might be even a little bit more challenging. Who dressed you? That might sound really weird, huh? But the question is, who dressed you? For example, sometimes I think my wife dresses me. We might be ready to go somewhere. We're just about to leave the house and she'll say, Steve, you're not wearing that, are you? Of which I usually respond, of course not. Just haven't got ready yet. By the way, what do you think I should wear? Quite often we are dressed by other people, but I'm not just talking about the cloth that you're wearing. I'm talking about our lives. Quite often people determine our moods and what we carry and what we wear. So the third question is, what do you carry? Here's something interesting. I was with a friend who he was walked in a room and the whole room just changed. And I said, how did that happen? He said, Steve, it's not what you say and what you do. It's what you carry that's important. I wonder what you carry into your day. What is it you carry into your workspace? What is it that you carry into your world? Because you see, what you wear and who dressed you will determine what you carry. Politicians, I heard, spend a lot of money getting professional consultants to come in and tell them what colours they should be wearing. If you want to come across powerful and dominant, wear a red tie or something red. If you want to be more approachable, then wear something blue, it's softer. Or if you want to be one of the mates, take your tie off and go down to the footy and have a beer with the blokes. It's what you carry and what you want to put across is what you wear. So I asked the question today, in your life, what did you choose to put on? who determined what you wear, but also what do you carry. Now, to help me explain this a little bit more and some lessons that I learned from that, I want to take you to a story. I want to take you right into the first book of the scriptures or the Bible called Genesis. Written back, this is the history of Israel. And we know a guy called Jacob who had a bit of a fallout with his twin brother Esau. Jacob finally finds the love of his wife called Rachel. And they decide to have, well, they're trying hard to have children. They couldn't have kids, so there's some interesting story comes with that. And I encourage you to read Genesis 3. It's a great, Genesis 37, it's a great story. But why they end up having this child, a God-given child, in Jacob's old age. To a son they called Joseph. Now, Rachel passed away at that time, so you can imagine how special Joseph was to Jacob. So Jacob is the 11th son. Sorry, Joseph is the 11th son of Jacob. So he's right down there in the food chain. And his name actually means, on a bad day, he will add, or on a good day, you could say his name means God be praised. Depends which day it is. But Joseph was Jacob's favourite son. So because of that, Joseph made him a beautiful coat. You've probably heard the story. Bright colours. So wherever he walked around, people knew how special he was. Let me take you to Genesis 37:3. And it says this, verse 3. Jacob loved Joseph, special son, more than any of his other children. Why? Because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. So one day, Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, a beautiful robe. Here's a thought. Joseph is wearing a robe that was given to him by his father. So he's wearing a coat of many colours. He was dressed by his father, and he was carrying pride. Pride that got him in big trouble. Pride that pushed him away from his brothers. But I want to ask you the question in your life. Are you wearing that which your family have put on you? Here's a thought. Are you wearing your hand-me-downs, in other words? I come from a family of 10. I'm number 7 son or 7 child. I know 7 is the perfect number, so I understand that, so I'm perfect. And I was the second youngest son. So you can imagine by the time the clothing got to me, they're pretty worn out, right? Everybody else has dribbled their food down it and probably ripped them in fights or whatever. And I get the worn out clothes. Sometimes the hand-me-downs, by the time we get them, are pretty worn out. You see, I wonder if your family, your friends, maybe your past has actually been put on you, and it determines who you are. It determines your moods. It determines the way that you live life. It determines how you respond to other people, because that's what you're wearing, hand-me-downs, and maybe you're wearing a little bit of pride. You see, sometimes we become a product of the past rather than the product of our future or maybe even our present. And so therefore, sometimes we're wearing hurt and pain, disapproval. Or maybe you've had a good childhood and you've been encouraged and you feel proud and you're wearing that has been given to you by your family of origin, your friends. But here's another piece of clothing that we find in Joseph's wardrobe. You see, not only was he first wearing the clothes given to him by his father, but in Genesis 37:23, we pick up the story a little bit more. See, at this time, Joseph, feeling pretty good about himself, goes out to see his brothers. His brothers aren't too happy about him. In fact, they think he's a little bit big-headed. He's had a dream, says they're all going to bow down to him. So they were feeling a little bit put out. Joseph, told by his dad to come out and bring food to his brothers. And this is where we pick it up in Genesis 37:23. It says, "So when Joseph arrived, his brothers ripped off the beautiful robe he was wearing. Then they grabbed him and threw him in the cistern. Now the cistern was empty. There was no water in it. So when the Ishmaelites, who were Midianite traders, came by, Joseph's brothers pulled him out of the cistern and sold him to them for 20 pieces of silver." Just stop there for a moment. Whenever you look in the Old Testament, you see pictures of Jesus. It might be interesting to know that they sold him for a certain amount of money. Sounds like Jesus. You'll pick that up as the story goes on. And the traders took him to Egypt. You see, this time, Joseph is no longer wearing his hand-me-down. That's been ripped off him. Instead, now he's wearing slaves' clothes. He's wearing the clothes of slaves. Clothes that are put on him to serve other people. Clothes that are being put on him that shows other people his position in this world. And who's he been dressed by? He's been dressed by others. He's been dressed by people who have come along and determined what Joseph should be. And what's he carrying? This time he's carrying rejection. Here's something that you might relate to, because I know that I have, that sometimes we allow other people to determine who we are. We put on the attitudes or the feelings of others because they tell us that's what we should be. Oh, they might not say it verbally, but in their actions and in their expectations of you. And sometimes we can be wearing slave clothes, clothes that have been determined by other people. Especially if you come from a dominant relationship where your partner is dominant on you, and you sometimes can be wearing the very things that other people have called you or said about you. Maybe in the workplace, you've been in a situation where people have said, "Oh, that's what we expect from you. After all, that's who you are." I wonder if you, or I know for me, have sometimes worn the clothes of others, and therefore sometimes we carry that rejection because we're not good enough. But let me take you a little bit further. You see, Joseph now is being treated like this slave. He's wearing the clothes of other people. He's feeling that sense of rejection, and he carries that with him. You can see that. But now we go a little bit further. He's been a good slave. He's worked really hard. His boss, Pharaoh, is feeling pretty good about him. And he's working hard, but unfortunately, Pharaoh's wife sort of thinks he looks pretty good. And she wants to have a relationship with him. But you see, this slave man called Joseph knows that's wrong. And we pick up the story a little bit more in Genesis 39:12. She came, this is Pharaoh's wife, and grabbed him by his cloak, his clothes again, demanding, "Come on, sleep with me." Joseph tore himself away, but he left his cloak in her hand as he ran from the house. When she saw that she was holding his cloak and he had fled, she then went to her husband and said, "Joseph tried to rape me. Here is his cloak." And hence Joseph ends up in a prison. This time we find Joseph's not wearing the coat, the hand-me-down. He's not wearing the clothes of others, but he's been stripped of who he was. He's been stripped and now wearing nothing. You see, sometimes accusations, false accusations, can strip you of who you are, can take away from us. And we could be wearing those clothings of accusation. Interesting, isn't it, that back in the Garden of Eden, it says that they wore nothing and they felt ashamed. You see, he was wearing nothing. He was undressed by accusation, but he was carrying now a shame. And here he is in this prison of shame. Maybe you felt that sometimes. I know that there are people I've spoken to who have felt that internally there's a secret shame, there's a false accusation, and it puts them into a prison of shame. And we respond in that sometimes. And we don't achieve well because we're caught up in a prison that holds us back from being the very potential we're supposed to be. Because that's what happened to Joseph. He was in this prison. He was trying hard to get out by proving himself to the other prisoners, but he was caught in a prison of shame that was caused by false accusation. I wonder if sometimes that false accusation is given to us by ourselves. Those words in our heads that are telling us who we are. The words in our heads that tell us maybe we're not good enough. And we can be caught and clothed, and therefore we live out of that. But here comes the good news. And here's some good news for all of us. Because you see, the clothing that we've been put on by our past, the clothing that we've been stripped off by others, or the clothing that we've been accused of, and that shame that we might wear, actually can come to an end. And it did for Joseph. Because you see, he stayed true to who he was. And sometimes we've got to learn that we need to stay true to who we are. Because who you are isn't those things. There's something much more. You see, one day, after some amazing events that happened, Pharaoh needed somebody of character. He needed somebody of strength, somebody who could interpret his dreams. And Joseph just so happened to be the one that did that for him. And this is what happens in Genesis 41:42. We hear the conclusion of the story, which is very exciting, because now we find Joseph before Pharaoh. And listen to his new set of clothes. Then Pharaoh removed his signet ring, very important, the signet ring that gave him authority, removed it from his hand and placed it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in fine linen clothing and hung a gold chain around his neck. Here's Joseph, who once was clothed by his past, was then stripped and made into a slave. He was accused and wore the clothing of shame. And now he's right before Pharaoh, and he's got a robe on that is suited for a king. He's dressed by the king, and he's carrying authority. You see, here he was now, honoured and dressed by a king to carry great authority. And that's the promise for us. That's the promise that Jesus, you see, Jesus actually went through exactly the same thing. That's what's so exciting about this story of Joseph, because in there is Jesus. Jesus, who was clothed as his special son to his Father in heaven, it says. He came to earth. He was treated as a slave. His robe was ripped off him, and even they gambled for his clothing while he was on the cross naked, carrying shame. But you see, here's the good news. He was in a grave, he was in a tomb. And it says on the third day he rose, and when Mary found him, what was he wearing? He was wearing new clothing. Who dressed him? There wasn't a wardrobe in that cave. Who dressed Jesus? Where did he get those clothes from if they weren't given to him by heaven? And this is the promise for you and I. See, it doesn't matter what you're carrying, but there's a whole new wardrobe that is available for you and I. Colossians 3, that letter I told you that Paul wrote, let me read the whole verse to you, because this is your promise for you and me. We can choose not to have to live in our past, not to be dressed by others, not to be carrying that shame of the world that's on us, but we can clothe ourselves with a risen and a risen King who gives us authority. This is what it says in Colossians 3:10. Put on your new nature. And that is the promise for all of us. It's not about just looking good on the outside, but we can actually put on our whole new nature and be renewed as you learn to know your Creator and become like Him. That's the invitation to all of us. That's the invitation for me. I can actually live in my new nature. In this new life, it doesn't matter if you're a Jew or a Gentile, circumcised or uncircumcised, Paul says, a barbarian, uncivilized, slave or free. That doesn't matter about your past. Christ is all that matters, and He lives in all of us. And that's the invitation. Since God chose you to be the holy people He loves, you must clothe yourself with tender-hearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. That's a choice. Would you clothe yourself with that rather than the things that the world would want us to clothe ourselves with? Make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. Above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds us all together in perfect harmony. And let the peace that comes from Christ rule in your heart. Joseph, who was falsely accused, this peace that comes from Christ can rule in your heart, that you are actually a new creation. For as members of one body, you are called to live in peace and always be thankful. You see, to put something on, you first of all got to take something off. And that's what our invitation is. We don't have to live with all that anymore. We can clothe ourselves. And it's a choice. Who would I clothe myself today? How would I clothe myself? See, we can wear Jesus. We put on our new nature. We are clothed by Jesus. And hey, we can carry the very nature of Jesus. That was the promise. Just want to finish off by telling you a story. I may have told it once before, but it's very real to me and very special. It was a story of a time I went to India. We were on a trip. We were going to a place called Bhopal. And if you know your history, it's got an amazing history to it. It's where a great gas disaster happened and hundreds of thousands of people had died there. I was speaking in this church. It was quite a large church. And I was speaking there and I had an interpreter. Not sure what sermon he was preaching. I think it might have been different to mine because he seemed to take a lot longer to say the things I was saying. But at the end of the service, this gentleman came up and he was wearing some dirty clothes and he was really, his face was drawn in and he came down to the front and he just fell on the floor and we were praying for people and the interpreter said, "This man wants you to pray for him." So I said, "No worries." So I went and prayed for him. As I was praying for him, I said, "What's his name?" I said, "His name is Bogram." I said, "Really?" Okay, so I prayed for this guy called Bogram. All of a sudden, he started manifesting and doing some crazy things. And I'm going, "Oh my goodness, what's happening here?" And we kept praying and he settled down. And the pastor of this church said to me, "You need to understand about this man. He actually belongs in a village and he's the head of this village and they are right into witchcraft and all sorts of things." And he was very tormented by all this, his history and his spirits that he was carrying. And his whole village were not a Christian village at all, quite the opposite. He said, "I will pray for this man all week. He will stay at my house and I will pray for him because he has many things that he's carrying." So I left it there and I went home back to Perth and I think it was about a year, might have been a bit longer, I went back to this same place in Bhopal. We got off the train and my host was waiting for me, but also the pastor of this church I preached at. He said to me, "Steve, Bogram would like to meet you again." I said, "Who's Bogram?" He said, "That was the man you prayed for at the church." I said, "Oh, that's right." So I said, let's look at my itinerary and let's see if we can fit it in. And we did. And we managed to have a whole day to go in this very remote village. It was a long way out. It was a very hot drive. And we get to his village, and as we're driving up, there was this man standing there. He looked taller. He was wearing all white clothing. He was smiling. And he was carrying something so much different. He invited me into his house for a meal. I walked into his house, and when you're in India, especially in a village like this, grace becomes really important. Lord, protect my stomach because I'm not used to this very different food. We're there, and he's got his whole family there. His family are really just great family. And he tells me that each one of them had discovered a new life in Jesus in the last 12 months. You see, his change of life and what he was carrying changed his whole family. He says to me afterwards, he's motioning to me that I need to come with him, and so I followed him up the side of the steps. It had a flat roof. And I'm up there on the flat roof, and there was all this beautiful material that was all around, and there was a little pulpit, and there was just some cushions. And I said, oh, this looks good. What's happening? He said, oh, we're going to have a church service. I looked over the wall, and there was people coming from the village from all over the place, all coming up the stairs, ready for this service. I thought, wow, this is amazing, until someone tapped on my shoulder and said, they're waiting for you to preach, which might have been nice to have had some warning. But you see, what happened there was, here was this man, Bogram, who was carrying so much stuff, who was dressed, and even in his face, you could see he was carrying a lot of pain and a lot of stuff inside him. But he became a new person, and he started carrying something different. And when he went back to his own village, his own whole village saw something different, and all decided that they wanted to wear what he was wearing. They wanted to wear this new life, this new culture, this new person. You see, that's the invite to you and to I. Every day, not whether you're a Christian or not a Christian, who are you wearing today? Are you wearing your old nature, or would you put on your new nature? Would you wear something different? Because you see, what you wear becomes who you are. And I want to become a person that is somebody that's carrying those things that Paul tells us. Ones of love, ones of acceptance, rather than ones of selfishness. You see, that's our challenge today. And that's what I wanted to share with you as you think about when you get up in the morning. What am I going to wear? But no, what am I going to carry? And who am I going to be today? Because here's the invite. Jesus Christ, who came from his Father, who lived on earth, who died again, invites you to take on his nature and to be a reflection of him, because it will change the world. It will change the community. It will change the family around you. God bless you. And if you want to find out more about how you can do that, make sure you go online, you check out the website and find out how you can actually put on Christ to become a new person and to carry a different attitude into this world. Thank you. Amen.